This is why it's helpful to ask these questions. I had my speaker on mute. Can you hear me now? Yes, am I coming through? Awesome. Awesome. We will go with that then, and trust that that will hold us where we need to be. Let me double check that we are good to go on the other settings. Awesome. All right, well, let's dive in. Welcome to week 3 in the month of February. And it's, you know, when I was younger, I really did not have any comprehension about what people spoke about when they said, "Isn't the year just flying by?" I guess I'm just older maybe now, but it's the 20th of February, and wow, we've got a little over a week left. So third week of the month, we are diving into what it means to lead authentically. And there are a lot of different leaders out there we could look to. There are a lot of different characters out there. There's a lot of positive examples, a lot of negative examples. What I want us to look at today is actually a character from the scriptures, and his name is Nehemiah, and he had a pretty cool job. But we will get to him in just a few minutes. I just want to start by saying I have 8 thoughts. We are not going to get through 8 thoughts in this session. We probably will get through 2 or 3, and so next month we'll look to cap off the others, and maybe I'll add 1 or 2 as bonuses. The goal is not to fly through all 8 thoughts, but the goal more is for us to receive, okay, in my life, what does it look like for me to be authentic as a leader in whatever role that I find myself in? I think that the foundation for leadership and for authentic leadership is so much more about character than it is about charisma. And a lot of times people will say, no, I could never lead, or I could never kind of move down that path because I don't have the personality for doing something like that. And we're in the middle of reviews, annual reviews this week actually for our team here, and I have a number of different team members that they're just plodders, and there's no just about it. They are faithful, they are consistent, they keep showing up, they keep persevering no matter what seems to be thrown at them, and they continue to reap because of their consistency, because of their faithfulness, frankly because of their character. And so you don't have to be charismatic, you don't even have to be bubbly, you don't have to be over energetic to be a leader, to be an authentic leader. In fact, if you do try to behave in those ways and that isn't you, people can tell for the most part. Now, my father-in-law actually is an introvert, and for a while I didn't even know that he was an introvert because he worked so hard when he was in public at being energetic and being enthusiastic and showing interest, and so when I found out that he was an introvert, I realized actually how much effort he had to put in to relationship and being with people and being around people. And so what you really need to be authentic as a leader is so much more about character. And I've seen a lot of charismatic leaders in my lifetime. And to be honest with you, I always kind of have a check in my spirit just to kind of with this idea, well, let's just wait and see. Let's wait and see. You know, um, some are phenomenal communicators. Promise you the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it's in the deliverables. It's in the let's see what happens when the lights are turned off, and um, when the record button isn't recording anymore, and whether they are able to deliver, after that on what they've promised or what they've said that they would do. And so what I want us to talk about today is this guy named Nehemiah, and I want us just to look at a couple of characteristics in his story, because I want to challenge ourselves in our own leadership circles with these same characteristics, and just do a kind of an evaluation, and then maybe invite God into that space where we might become more aware about living life, about experiencing His life through us, increasing these different characteristics. So the first one is the idea of compassion, and so I want to just talk to you for a second and just tell you a little bit about Nehemiah. If you don't know him, if you're not familiar with his story, he cared about people. I mean, you don't get very long into the book of Nehemiah without finding out that his compassion shows up. I mean, straight away. Verse 4 of the very first chapter says, "Look, when I heard these things, when I heard that the walls of Jerusalem were broken down, that the gates had been burned with fire, I sat down and I wept for days. I mourned and I fasted and I prayed, before God." And for Nehemiah, like it wasn't like it was the next town over for him. Like, he was literally very far away from Jerusalem, but he for his job, he was a cupbearer for the king. He had very close proximity to power. He was a very high kind of ranking assistant. If you look at it like in political context, he had a cushy number, and he had, let's just say, he had everything he could have wanted, and Jerusalem was very, very, very far away. He's in a foreign country. He's never actually seen Jerusalem, and yet he cares about the problems in Jerusalem, and he cares about the people in Jerusalem, and he didn't have to be concerned. So some people would say, why are you getting so upset about those people? They're so far away. That it doesn't impact you, but he cared. Because he had compassion. He was a leader and he had compassion. And when he heard that his people were having a difficult time, that the walls were torn down and the city was destroyed, he cared, right? And so I want to ask you, how's your compassion quotient? How's your compassion level? Where is that? A lot of times we have people come in and say, look, I'm just numb. If I'm going to be honest with you, I'm numb. I don't feel hardly anything. And a lot of times that's because of repeated trauma or stretching. It's almost like if we had an elastic band and we continue to stretch it out, after a while it would lose its elasticity. And so when we're thinking about Nehemiah, he hadn't lost his elasticity. Let me tell you, he wasn't numb. You don't sit down and cry and weep and pray because you're numb and you don't feel anything, right? So number one, Nehemiah had compassion, and it's true sometimes when things are going well for us that it's easy for us to forget about hurting. Other people that are hurting around us. And sometimes we will get caught up in the idea that well, I don't have it as bad as, as other people have it. And that might be true. You don't have it as bad as other people have it, but that doesn't negate your pain or other people's pain that are close to you. Sometimes we'll say, well, suck it up. You don't have it as bad as somebody else has. All we do when we say those things is we devalue them and we minimize their pain instead of loving them in their pain where they are and helping them out of it, or just being a presence in it. Yeah. So love is the foundation of authentic Christian leadership. And chapter 5, Nehemiah's reaction kind of surfaces again just around injustice that's going on there. The poor, had complained about 4 different things. That they didn't have enough food, that their homes were they're being charged just way too much for the homes that they were living in. Taxes were really high. They had to sell, this is impossible to kind of think about, but they had to sell their children into slavery to pay their bills. And so Nehemiah hears about these things, and he starts ripping, he gets angry actually about the poor being ripped off, and so we see his anger. So yes, he's compassionate, but in his compassion, anger surfaces, and so that just begs the question: is it okay to get angry as a leader? Is that cool? And I'd love to hear what you think about that. Is that cool to get angry as a leader? What do you think? Go ahead and type in your answers into the chat box if you are with us live, and if not, then you could send me some thoughts in an email at the bottom of the replay or in the Ask Kevin section in your members area. But he gets angry, and I think just another thought around leadership is that people don't care how much you know or what you know until they know that you care about them. They don't care what you know or how much you know until after they actually believe that you do have a care in the world about them. And in fact, a lot of us carry a belief: nobody cares. Nobody really cares. And that filters through our stories, and that impacts what we feel and impacts what we think. Well, that is what we think, right? And impacts how we function. Some carry the idea, I don't want to be a burden, so I won't tell my pain or my struggle, or because if I do and you hear it, then I'll be a burden on you. And yet we're called to carry one another's burdens, to share one another's burdens, and in doing that, fulfill the calling of God on our stories, on our lives, right? So first off, I just want to ask you, how on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say your compassion level is? 10 being the most compassionate, most caring you could possibly be. Where's your compassion level right now? I'm the only one who's going to see your answers, so when you write those in, I will see them. So yeah, one of you are saying, Kim, God gets angry at the oppression of widows and orphans and poor. He does, right? And so if God is allowed to get angry, then surely we're allowed to get angry. Jesus, threw over the tables for people getting ripped off, right, in the house of God, and so there's a place for anger, right? Actually, we're told in the New Testament, be angry and don't sin. So somehow you're able to be angry and not be doing it in a faulty way or in a sinful way. And so there's a righteous indignation, there's a righteous anger, and so we just all have to be in control when we're angry about injustice or something that's happened. But I'm curious, where are you in your compassion level? Out of 10, I'm seeing some are 5 or 6, some are lower than 5, and we have some 7s and 8s, So where are you on your compassion level? If you would let me know that, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Nehemiah wasn't just compassionate, gang, but let me write this down here. So, but Nehemiah also was contemplative. In his leadership, he was also contemplative. Now, contemplative means he knew that leading wasn't all about rushing in and doing and achieving and just plowing forward. In fact, I find it fascinating actually that he balanced the time that he spent with people, leading them, with alone time with God, time with his thoughts. And so he wasn't just a compassionate leader, but he was a contemplative leader. And we live in an age where it is just hard to stop. It's hard for a lot of people to slow down, let alone stop. And when we slow down and when we stop, it's almost like we've been running so hard, so fast for so long that it just doesn't even feel right. In fact, some people share that I can't sit still. Like my brain just starts racing, or I kind of hear all of these kind of accusation thoughts. You are lazy. You're accomplishing nothing. Get up off your lazy duff and get busy. God hasn't saved you to sit. He's saved you to serve, So Bob's thought, anger never really accomplishes anything. Seeing it through the other person's eyes, listening, understanding, and then responding is so much more effective. Yeah, only your Irish brother could have learned this way earlier. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but you can hear them out, validate them, and explain, why another path might be more effective to follow. I'm seeing Becca is coming in at an 8, and so we're all across the board as far as compassion. Some people don't know what level their compassion quotient is at, because they don't go there, right? We don't speak that language of emotion very often, if at all. And so when we do stop to take stock on where we are on feeling compassion for another person, there are some people who are brilliant acts of service givers, right? But they struggle with knowing or feeling compassion, empathy, right? It's very cerebral. It's very factual. There's a need. I can meet it. I'll meet it. I'm happy to do that. As long as I'm not getting ripped off. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's more of you to that, and so, to helping, right, and to providing acts of service. So Nehemiah took time, right? And so someone has said the effectiveness of your public leadership is determined by your private life. The effectiveness of your public leadership is determined by your private life. I love that thought. And yet, when we slow down long enough to kind of think about it, and just think about, all right, so when was the last time I stopped, and how often am I contemplative in my life? How often am I just moving to one thing to the next without reflection, without debriefing, on what happened there? I know in the army, after they have missions, they do after action reviews. And so when they've taken action, when they've gone out on a mission, they come back and they review and they ask, how could we have done that better? What went well? What didn't go well? why did such and such happen, and so on. And Aristotle said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Ooh, there's actually a tool in your tool vault that kind of talks about that. Just talks about busyness, talks about speed, talks about our pace, and talks about reflection and stopping to think. Yeah. So 9 times in this short book, Nehemiah stops and prays, sometimes for like a significant period of time, and he clearly is a man of prayer. And so this is not about a guilt trip for us, right? This is just about a check-in, an evaluation on our leadership and on different components and characteristics of it. Where is compassion for me? And if I find myself having a difficult time providing compassion to other people, maybe that's a space for us to invite God in to say, hey, Lord, you were a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, the psalmist describes you as. And so like, a lot of people are very uncomfortable being around people that are in pain and are struggling. In our reviews this week, one of our team is one of our client care specialists, right? And she was sharing how in the beginning, and she's still quite new, but in the beginning, she said, I was like, ooh, what do I do when someone called in a lot of pain? And she just talks about, as time continued, I became more comfortable and more confident, I think, being, comfortable at receiving their pain without taking it on to me, or without taking responsibility, but loving them there and giving them hope and giving them encouragement, and then helping them move down the path of hope and help and healing, right? In getting them into a counseling process or a coaching process or one of our programs. So contemplation, not just compassion, but contemplation is massive in authentic leadership. Every decision that Nehemiah had to make, every crisis he had to face, every criticism that he received, he took it to God and unpacked that, prayed about that. I would also just say here that when we talk about the concept of prayer, it's so much more about a conversation as it is dedicated, alone, quiet time. Now, the contemplative speaks to alone, solitude, silence, quiet, stillness. Yeah, to afford the ability to be able to be contemplative, to think through, to contemplate, to think about, to process. But when we talk about prayer as part of contemplation, know that can happen as a conversation, as fluid as water ebbs and flows, on the seashore or by a lake, as well as it is about stillness, as well as it is about concentrated time of prayer and thinking. In fact, in verse 5, he says, "O God of heaven, you're a great and awesome God, and you keep covenant, of love with those who love you and who obey your commands." He said, "Please let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayer of your servant this day and night for your servants, the people of Israel." He prayed day and night. And so, wow, a lot of people would tell me, if I'm going to be honest with you, Daily, I don't think about him a whole lot. Like, he barely gets a look in until pain hits. And then God gets a look in. And so my encouragement to you, as you think about leadership in your life, let's make sure that we're including and open to the wonderful Counselor, to the King of Kings, to the Lord of Lords, to the Creator who knows us better than we know ourselves. and the situation and the circumstances that we find ourselves in better than we could ever know them. Yeah. Authentic leaders know that they have to spend time alone, because there's so much that flows out of them when they are serving, when they are leading. Even Jesus, said in one of the stories in the New Testament, he's walking down the road and somebody reaches out and touches him, grabs his robe, and he says, "Hey lads, life has left me." And they're like, "Jesus, we're in a crowd of people, of course life has left you." But he was aware of outflow, and I think it's probably why in his leadership, in his life, he took significant times to be alone. I know for me, for too long in my life, I just charged ahead, just non-stop. I wouldn't even walk, gang. I wouldn't even walk to places that I didn't have wheels to get to. I would run because I didn't want to waste time. I would eat standing up because I didn't want to sit down. It was like just refuel, get the fuel in and get going again. Now, I enjoy my food a whole lot more now. And I enjoy the in-between stages. Don't get me wrong, there's still motor that revs pretty high in your Irish brother. But leadership, like we're talking about, is not supposed to be done alone. And it's not about superiority. Servant leadership was the model that Jesus gave, right? To do what we do here can't be done alone, and someone has said, look, if your dream is able to be accomplished alone, then your dream is probably too small. We need other people in our lives to accomplish and pull off the dreams, the visions, the desires, the goals that God has given to us. So let me ask you, is it tough for you to stop? Is it tough for you to slow down? Whether it to be to pray or to think or to process. How is that for you? Let me know in the chat area. There's a part where Nehemiah says in chapter 5 and verse 6, he says, when I heard the outcry of the poor and the charges that they were saying, I was angry and I pondered them in my mind. First of all, he ponders them in his mind. And then he says, I accused the nobles and the officials. He put his noggin in gear before he put his mouth in motion. He was a man of contemplation. And he kept his cool. I think Bob said earlier in the chat, anger doesn't accomplish anything. In fact, 1 John says anger is darkness, and the anger of man doesn't produce the righteousness of God, John says as well. Anger actually in conversation and communication only escalates conflict, not de-escalates it. So for Nehemiah here, contemplation preceded his presentation, his accusation, or whatever it was that he had to say. And once you have the contemplation down, the presentation can flow a whole lot more naturally. It's a whole lot more prepared, right, than just flying off the cuff. Nehemiah was a man of compassion. He cared about people, but he was also a man of contemplation in that he spent time in prayer and in thought. So let me check in the chat area with you. Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult. I'm seeing to slow down, to be still, to contemplate. I watched a movie recently, and there was just one line in the movie where the main actor said this thought. He said, it's not the performance that's difficult for me. It's not even when I'm around all of the people and the parties and the celebrations. He said it's the in-between times that torment my soul. And he didn't say a whole lot more than that. But the counselor in me kind of said, I wonder what he's thinking. I wonder what thoughts torment his soul in the in-between times. What happened for him is his success basically afforded him, and I don't know that that's even a fair term, but afforded him the ability to be able to reject people, to push people out of his life, and then it just opened him up to manipulation from other people, and did not bode well for him. Sometimes it's hard for us to stop, to slow down, to contemplate, because we don't like the thoughts that surface when we do. And my encouragement is that the fastest path to peace is to process those thoughts. Speaking of peace, the scriptures say, as much as it lies within you, live at peace with all men. As much as lies within you, live at peace with all men and women. Sometimes you can only do what you can do, and you have to, in fact, all the time, you have to leave the results with your Father. But I think if behavior reveals belief, then one thought probably that's applicable here is the idea that I believe it's better for me not to stop and slow down. And so I don't. I remember when I started to slow down, when I started to change my schedule and create times to think and just to be, to plan, to prepare, to process. I remember it being such a stark difference. Like a deep breath of oxygen, honestly. And I remember just noticing. I'm ashamed. I wasn't really ashamed, but that's a very familiar phrase. I was ashamed to say, so this is what it feels like to have some space in your head, some margin up here. Really? Yeah, really. And you're able to have thoughts, go figure, that they just weren't able to make it in before because you were just going 90 to the dozen, flying down the road. Can I share with you one other thought before we wrap up our time today? And can I share a third thought with you, that Nehemiah wasn't just compassionate, he wasn't just contemplative, but he was cheerful. He was a cheerful fella. He was a cheerful fella. So let me write that down, okay? Cheerful is number 3 on the thoughts that we're sharing today in authentic leadership. What does that look like? Well, it looks like compassion. It looks like slowing down enough to be contemplative, and it looks like cheerfulness. Well, how on earth are we getting that about Nehemiah? You see, when it comes to thinking about cheerfulness for him, there's one verse in there in chapter 2 and verse number 1, and it just kind of describes him a little bit, and it says this. It says, when the wine was brought forth, I took the wine and I gave it to the king. I hadn't been sad in his presence before. And so Nehemiah's been serving this guy for a significant amount of time, without a frown on his face, without a sour puss, as the Irish colloquial saying goes, and without a disgruntled attitude. He generally was upbeat, generally was cheerful, and he wasn't one of those people who every time you met them, they brought their problems out like they were a pet, and like, here, look at this. Would you look at that? Leaders and authentic leaders, right? They're not always, happy clappy and smiling, but there is a cheerfulness about them. There is an openness and a willingness to be optimistic and to be conscious about thinking positively about what's next, or about what's coming, or even about what they're in. Leaders are to lift other people up, not let them down. And it's why cheerfulness is really an important kind of characteristic when we think about authentic leadership in our world, right? In our context. And so if you want to be a leader that's authentic, that's plugged into a power source that is beyond what is normal and what is natural, then cheerfulness is going to be part of your story. Part of what people are going to say about you. Debbie and I went to watch a play a couple weeks ago. I came away from that play, God will speak to you in the strangest of places. But I came out of that play with this kind of idea. I want to be the king of kindness. I want to be the king of kindness. Now, it's not a competition thing, but that was just a phrase that kind of came out. It wasn't even in the there were relationships in the play, and they weren't great, and there were others that were beautiful, But something that struck me is, I want to be kinder. Kind is not the same as cheerful. I know. But I felt prompted to kind of share that with you, because look, I'm going to tell you, I have it in me not to be kind, not to be soft, not to be gentle. Right now I'm being challenged for all I am worth, because we have one puppy that's kind of new to us, our therapy dog called Murphy, that's in training, right? And if that wasn't enough, and believe me, he's enough with the other two, but we're minding our son's dog named Rocco. Rocco's a pit bull, and I'm telling you, he is as soft, can I just say, he's soft as all get out, but his head is as big a head I've ever seen on a dog. He was supposed to be house trained. He's not house trained, or maybe he's house trained in his own house, but he's not house trained in mine. It has challenged my kindness. Can I get a witness? I mean, and the other fella who we kind of had him down in a rhythm, he's like, well, he's peddling, so why can't I? And we've kind of taken a few steps back with Murphy. Cheerful is where we're talking about. All right, I need Jesus to be cheerful when we're looking after 4 dogs right now. But Nehemiah, some of us are just not naturally cheerful. Some people get up in the morning and they say, "Good morning, Lord." And other people get up in the morning and they're saying, "Good Lord, it's morning," I mean, we just have different bents. And they're not wrong. But the medical world has, tells us, research has proven time and time again that there's actually a biochemical change just when you decide to smile. Hormones are produced in your body, and it changes you. I've told you maybe before that Debbie and I both have pretty serious, heavy kind of duty roles that we do in our jobs, and we have had to be intentional about laughter, intentional about fun. A lot of times when we have couples come in for intensives, VIP days, whatever, a lot of times they've got the laughter knocked out of them, the cheerfulness knocked out of them, and they're so worn out and weary that they are not intentional about laughter and not intentional about fun. And so that's part of our kind of strategizing with them in helping them turn the ship around and be intentional about that moving forward. But cheerfulness, right? How do you be cheerful when the people that you're working with aren't cheerful necessarily? They don't necessarily speak your language, your love language, or don't maybe even share your perspective or your values or your convictions. How do you be cheerful even when you're tired and worn out. The secret is found in verse number 10 of Nehemiah chapter 8. And it's just in this one simple phrase, and I want to leave you with this. This day is sacred, Nehemiah says, to the Lord. So please don't grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. How can you be cheerful when maybe the circumstances around you aren't exactly joyful? How can you hold on to joy when there's a lot of judgment happening, when there's a lot of criticism happening, when there's a lot of rejection happening? How do you hold on to joy? Nehemiah says, the joy of the Lord is my strength. There was a lot of opposition against Nehemiah at that very time. And so he's basically telling us, listen, no matter what's coming against you, you can still have joy as a leader. It's different than happiness, because happiness is linked to what's happening. Yeah? Joy is internal, is deeper, not based on circumstances. You can have joy in the midst of tragedy. You can have joy when you are worn out, because it comes from a source of another. And if you follow him, then you possess that source right at the very core of who you are. So Nehemiah is compassionate as a leader, he's contemplative as a leader, but he's also cheerful as a leader. So let me ask you, when we think about cheerfulness, is that easy for you? When we think about how that feels for you, how that kind of lives out in your story, is that easy for you? I will tell you this, it is all about where your mind is set. It's all about what we fix our mind to. And so, as we kind of wrap up today, I have a couple of questions I want to answer. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat area. We will look next month at the leadership track around a couple more characteristics about Nehemiah. But for now, I just want you to take away and chew on and contemplate compassion. Sometimes it's hard to have compassion when you carry pain, wounding, hurt from the person that maybe you're being challenged to be compassionate toward. Compassion does not mean you're a pushover or a doormat. It just means that you care. But sometimes even in caring, you have to make tough choices. You have to make tough decisions. And sometimes in making tough decisions, that doesn't mean that you don't care. Especially when others don't agree with the decisions that you have to make. So, let me ask you, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat area. If it's sensitive, I won't call you out by name, obviously. So some of you are saying, for me, if I don't habit, there's a word called habituate. If I don't habituate, someone has said, if you don't habit it, you don't have it, right? But if you don't habit it in your life, then it evades you, it escapes you. And this is talking about prayer, this is talking about silence, talking about stillness. Again, the practices of our lives reveal the priorities of our lives and the principles on which our lives are lived, and the perspectives that drive those principles and those practices and those priorities. So, as you're thinking of a couple of questions, I had a couple that came in earlier, and so I want to address those. If you will give me a second, we'll pull those up. And so one is around a relationship with a mom and a mom's displeasure with a decision being made in the context of family, right? And so, and in the context of forgiveness. And so here's the mom's perspective. The mom's perspective is this: is if you, the child, do not forgive, then God's blessing will not be on your life. So, first of all, I would like to clarify forgiveness, okay? Because in this context, mom is thinking that forgiveness is, washing away what has been done against the daughter, and carrying on like the Our Father. So I am being told that I have lost connection. So I'm just going to say, hang in there. It should come back in just a second. Yeah, you should see a green background now because there's two different platforms that we're using, and somehow the connection only holds for a certain time. Yeah. So don't worry, the replay will remove the green screen, but you can hear me and see me now. Yeah. All right. So let me jump back in and just talk about mom for a second, right? So mom said, if you don't forgive, then God's blessing won't be on your life. Okay, so in Catholic Ireland, where I grew up, we would say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others. Okay, so forgive our trespasses as we forgive others is part of that prayer, okay? But there's another passage in Matthew where it talks about if you don't forgive others, God won't forgive you, right? And there's all sorts of debate and theologians and smarter people than I who would talk to you about that till the cows come home. But I think here, what mom is wanting to say is, look, if you do not forgive that person for what they've done and carry on in relationship with them the way you were before, then God isn't going to bless your life. And I will just say this simply, that when we hold unforgiveness in our hearts, is hard to live free, to love well, to live fully, to love deeply, and to lead authentically, because we're carrying this hurt, this wound. And frankly, Hebrews tells us, be careful, because that wound and hurt can spring up and cause bitterness to be birthed, and a lot of people around you are affected. All right, so I agree with mom to the point of the need for us to release. I will say this, that sometimes we rush too quickly into forgiveness without fully understanding how it's affected me, how it's caused me to feel, and what it's caused me to believe. And so I do think it's important to not to wait, not to not to drag your heels around forgiveness, but definitely to understand, okay, what am I actually doing in here? What was the result, or what were the effects of that experience on me? And that's really, really important. Again, in my upbringing, when we'd go to bed, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, and if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And actually, Lord, will you just forgive Johnny, because man, when he did that to me today, that's not the type of forgiveness we're talking about here. Okay. So um, I guess I would like to say that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. God's blessing, God's going to bless you because you're his kid, not because you perform correctly all the time. In fact, sometimes God will break you with his love and his blessing when you know you are walking in ways that are not of him. So I don't know mom's heart, and I'm not here to judge mom's heart, but I think some of the motivation that she's wanting you to have is, you better hurry up and forgive, or else God's blessing is going to remove from your life. God doesn't approve of our behavior all the time, but he accepts us. And so, there's so much more here. What is the thinking that is driving you to behave in the ways that you're behaving? Mom would say, look, you can't give up hope. You have to wait for change to happen. Well, yeah, I believe in not giving up hope, and I believe in waiting for change to happen. And then Dad is saying, if the relationship breaks down, and you date someone else, then you won't have his support. It's heavy weight. That's a pretty heavy weight to carry from Mom and Dad, and on it goes. It's just hard to not just sit there and question everything I believe. Okay, well, first of all, it isn't about everything you believe, but you have parents who grew up in a different era, who still probably believe that the behavior of their children is a direct correlation on them, and that's just difficult. But your children have to stand on their own 2 feet, and the children's choices are the children's choices, right? So I can't forgive and move on. Well, you can forgive if you decide to forgive, understanding that forgiveness is a decision to set you free. It's not about restoration of relationship. Forgiveness stands on its own. So that would be something that I would say to you. And then also, yeah, I mean, it's difficult not feeling support from parents. And at the end of the day, you have to live with you, and you have to put your head on your pillow. And you have to walk in your shoes. So obviously, for all of us in this group, there are many other details that are behind the question of my parents aren't supporting me, and it's really difficult. It is really difficult when your family of origin are not on the same page, are not supportive. I would say this. I would say that there are other steps before divorce. I would say that there are steps called separation. There are steps called legal separation. I understand that your partner is not doing what's already been decreed by the court, so you have to deal with that. You never know when the prodigal's going to come home. However, you have to. Uh, we're going to talk about next week conviction, or next month when we talk about in the leadership track. We're going to talk about conviction of Nehemiah and all of the opposition that came against him, in the rebuilding process. But that will come then. For now, um, I just want to affirm that it is difficult when we don't have parental support, and also just say that no one can make this decision for you. Not your pastor, not your counselor, not your coach, not your parents, not your siblings. You have to make that decision. And part of the journey that we're all living is to be able to walk in the freedom of our own decisions, and knowing that we are loved and accepted by our Savior, and it frees us from living for the acceptance of other people, and actually being at peace with that, and finding a joy not because of that, but in that. In everything give thanks, it says in 1 Thessalonians 5:33. It doesn't say for everything give thanks, but it says in everything give thanks. So my encouragement for you is to put your mind's focus on what you can be thankful for, what you can be grateful for, what you do have, as opposed to what you don't have, and what isn't the way you would like for it to be. And frankly, to do that for all of us takes Jesus. So with that, I am going to bid you a good day. And our time is up for today, but I will look for any of your questions that are coming in via email at Kevin, or send them to kevin@livelovelead.info, and I will be honored to get back with you and share some coaching thoughts around whatever is going on in your life, love, or leadership. And in the meantime, go be authentic leaders of compassion, of contemplation, and of cheerfulness. And may those around you be blessed, because they get to share life with you and you with them. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye.